So, ladies and gentlemen, here is a very shocking comedian, the most shocking comedian of our time, a young man who is skyrocketing to fame, Lenny Bruce. Here he is.
Will Elizabeth Taylor become bar mitzvahed? No, I promise continuity. I'll behave myself. I'll do all the lines that we rehearsed, you know. That's the thing, you know. I have a reputation for being sort of controversial and irreverent and also the semantic bear trap of bad taste. And actually I do have, and I will always be accused of bad taste by the people who eat in restaurants to reserve service, you know, that kind of scene to anyone, yeah. But you might be interested in how I became offensive. Like, started in school with drinking, and I was like a real depressed kid, you know, and 7, 8 years old, and I'd really get juiced and get out of my... And so the teacher would really get bugged, you know, with me singing and carrying on, and calling Columbus a fink, and boosting Aaron Burr and all that.
An interview with Nat Hentoff toward the end revealed the effects of all the prosecutions. Lenny's old coat couldn't cover the 50 pounds he'd acquired. Gone was the snap and hustle of the stand-up comic. But even here, for a moment, Lenny was good and was able to...
What to you would be obscene in a club or vulgar?
Ladies that tell stag jokes are obscene to me, or drunk at parties and pick up their dress and have an eagle tattoo.
It's my American folk act. All right, my name's good enough, you get the brother, okay, all right?
Oh, I really did find God, I'll tell you, after Lenny died. I really did.
Lenny who?
Bruce. Oh, sorry.
Well, what has he to do with it?
Well, I was his lady for the last year of his life. And he was the first person. I mean, he was real tired when I met him. Tired, fat, like a little boy, tiny little boy. He had given so much and was ready to be given to. He was the first man who wasn't competitive with me and who just sucked out everything. No one ever even had the questions for it, and if I gave the answers, you know, I mean, I was on all the time in that point, you know, but he wanted it. He brought me out of non-existence in my life, and he saw behind my disguise, and he didn't hold it against me, and he busted me on my little tricks, and made me laugh, and I began to know what just a real, honest love for another human being was about, you know. And then I fell in love with him, and he fell in love with me somewhere along the way. Grew out of just a true, for me, I just loved him as a person at first. He was, one of the things that I loved so much about him was his ability to love, and he had such a fabulous capacity to appreciate whomever he was talking about and find that made that person special. And God knows he had a real smorgasbord of people entering his life every day.
But he was still together at the end?
In that way, he still had a joie de vivre that even though he never left his desk or not far from the fridge, you know, and maybe he went on a few rides around the hills with me and also to his parole officer once a week. Well, didn't leave the house much at that point.
Why?
I think that partly because part of it was he was ashamed of his body.
What do you mean, he was fat?
He was fat, he was sick, he suffered broken legs, he'd been in bed for months, he'd had a lung removed, he was all scarred up. He also spent all of his time by the typewriter trying to defend himself. He had many lawyers who had abandoned him by that point because he kept saying, "I'm not defending my right to speak freely. I'm defending the fact that I had that I had unfair trials." So he was working on the legal side of it. Now, he was an uneducated man in terms of the formal sense. He couldn't spell. But what he had realized that was from penal code to penal code, people had dropped commas and added ands and thes and changed entire meanings of laws, and he was going about it in a way that, I mean, it was very frustrating to him. He'd never get 6 words onto a page that he was typing when he wouldn't crumple it up and start again. But he was becoming quite knowledgeable. He got a few other people off from unfair trials. And he just stuck close to the house. We spent a lot of time. He didn't sleep every night. He would sometimes go 2-3 nights without sleeping, just reading and looking up words and typing. And
How did he teach you love?
He taught me. He just taught me a certain sense of appreciation. When he was such a great being, that he had the room to see everyone else's greatness. I mean, he was still thoroughly interested in other people's lives, which is the key to staying alive. You know, I mean, he was quite alive right to the day he died. I mean, there's all ways to paint the picture. In some ways, from some point of view, it was totally tragic, needless to say. You saw everything deteriorating around him, his house. All he could wear at the end was this kind of white nightgown that looked like a shroud. He was aware that he didn't have much time to live. He just knew it. I came there one Friday night, and he said to me, "I'm going to tell you something, and I don't want you to react. And I'm not saying it for dramatic effect. I'm not saying it except that I have to say it. I'm not saying it for any reason but that I have to say it, and I have to look at it. I am going to die this year."
How did he know?
He just knew. And I guess he was trying it on for size. And I said to him, "Oh, well, if I get you some raisin cookies, his favorite cookies, will you wait a year?" And he agreed, and I ran out and I got him some cookies. And then about a week later, he asked me to marry him. And then he went on a macrobiotic diet, which I knew nothing of.
Why didn't you marry him?
Why didn't I know about it?
No, why didn't you marry him?
Why didn't I marry him? He died.
Well, you would have married him.
When he asked me, we have been laughing all morning, and it was just wonderful. And he said, "Will you marry me?" And I said, "Please don't joke about this." He said, "I'm not joking. Will you marry me?" And I said, "Of course I will." And then that night, that was a Sunday, and I was cleaning out his office, and he looked at me and he started to cry, and he said, "You know, you'd just be getting an old jailbird." And I said, "How can you say that?" I mean, I had told my parents, I spoke to my mother on the phone, she was going to come out and the whole thing, and he was ashamed of himself in light of getting married, in light of what he thought marriage was, you know, and all that it involved.
You mean he thought he wasn't worthy?
Yeah, he said, "You're just getting an old jailbird." He thought I was so young and beautiful and bright and all. I mean, he made me feel so wonderful. I remember I had some guile. I would paint certain pictures about my life when someone would ask me questions. I would add a little color to it here, all coming from insecurity, not thinking that the real story was good enough, you know. Plus, I'm a storyteller, you know. And he would buck me every time. "That's a trick. What you're doing right now is a trick." And I have to laugh. He'd pop me, you know. And I began to like what was behind the mask more than what I had, you know, more than the game I had learned that meant survival. And so I began to really feel like a real person and feel real love, you know. And he made me feel nice. He made me feel like I was good. And he would always tell me how nice I was. I mean, the man could make you feel great. I was not the only person he made feel wonderful. But he was crazy about me, you know, and he said to me, "I don't have the right to tell you I love you. I've been so promiscuous, you know." But he had all these stirrings of emotions and everything that it was, needless to say, I took his death personally.
What do you mean, that you said responsible?
That was part of the whole trip later. I mean, I realized if I hadn't been such an idiot in terms of what he was going for when he became macrobiotic, which was to clean his body out. The man was not well. He had found blood in his urine one day, and I'd made an appointment to take him to Dr. Birnbaum, remember, and the blood had stopped, so he said, I'm not going, you know. And so, I mean, death, blood in your urine was not that real to me yet. I had never even been sick a day, you know, really. I still had the body of a 23-year-old. I could do anything. I didn't have to eat for days, and I was fine, you know. So, okay, then, you know, I didn't have to take him to Dr. Birnbaum. That meant we could be together for a few, I mean, you know, I remember making him kasha once, which was part of the diet, and salting it to taste. Who knew? He tasted it. It was so salty. He said, now I know what a drowning man feels like. This must be what a drowning man feels like. He wasn't on the diet much longer, and people would propitiate to him all the time. It was kind of like people would bring him drugs so they could get high with him, you know, and that was their way of being close to him and sharing that dangerous edge with him, you know. Well, that's what everyone loved about him anyway, is that he walked that danger line, you know, that he had the balls to stand up and...
There were a lot of people close.
Oh, yes, they were. They were, and he wanted love so badly. He was such a baby boy. Such a baby boy. So when you say, you know, when he died, I mean, I had already been rejected by the game that I had exposed in myself, and all the other people who were playing it didn't have that much use for me. He did not die as a hero, as you know. He died what can I tell you? The police, by the time they had gotten there and discovered him, John Judnick had already dressed him. He was fine. You know, they undressed him, pulled his pants down by the toilet, and stuck the works back in his arms. And it was total humiliation. He would have died if he'd seen those pictures, you know. And I didn't please anyone at home. The FBI was following me around because they were following everyone who had been close to him around, you know.
Well, what did they want from you?
They didn't know, they just wanted to stop what was inevitable after his death, which was that his consciousness would then become legion, and that would force everybody to expand, you know. Needless to say, every thought has its polarity, and he was bringing into view a whole lot of hypocrisy, and there was nothing to stop him from becoming a household word after he was dead, you know. I had this dream, in fact, when I was with him, which I did tell him it was a dream in two parts. The first part was him doing a sold-out performance at the Cafe A Go-Go in New York, the last place he played. Sold-out performance, and one section was roped off for kids, and nobody was sitting in it. And the second part of the dream, the top was off of the club. It was just skylight streaming through, and all there were just kids in the whole club. And Lenny was on stage. The sound system didn't work. So what he was talking, all you could see in the dream was him going, and the kids in the audience were all saying the exact same thing with him, but you could hear them. They were all saying the same thing. You could not hear Lenny, you could only hear the kids, and they weren't paying any attention to him because they didn't even know who he was. Well, what a dream. What a dream. Now, this was also, I quite honestly, I don't remember if it was after the time he told me he was going to die or before. But it's so funny because in the interim, from the time he first told me, he did start to get healthy. He told me he was taking me to Hawaii in October. He died in August, by the way, and the marriage thing, and then he took acid 10 days before he died, which he was not good with. He didn't smoke grass, and he could hardly take any of the psychedelics because he had real anxiety behind them, you know. He thought he was going to die every time it happened. He would transcend, you know, and he would transcend his problems. He would get so far beyond his problems that his reason for being here, it's kind of like if you had put Moses in the Promised Land, he probably wouldn't have known what to do with himself. The man had the goods and the equipment to lead people through the desert. That's what he was made for. That was his purpose. Do you know what I mean? He knew how to be responsible for that situation. It was like if Christ hadn't been crucified, he might have had to open a deli. Do you know? So I mean, so there was Lenny, and his purpose for being here was to be a prophet, A prophet is someone who puts words to the change of where we are and where we aspire to be. He knew how to put words to that, you know?
You feel like you're perpetrating
Well, some people have accused me of having gone the Lenny Bruce route or something like that. I never made any conscious decision to do anything like that, you know? I'm probably one of the few comics who don't know his bits by heart, you know?
No, but I feel like you're trying to tell your truth.
Yeah. Well, I paid for it. I definitely did. I mean, when you said, how did I find God? Lenny died while our love was still a rosebud. He'd only hurt me once or twice. The second time is when he died. I got so hurt. I'm not just talking about the fact of the obvious reason of death. I just thought, the night before he had told me he'd never hurt me. And he said, you know you can trust me, you know? And you know what I mean? And I knew I could. I mean, I knew I could trust this man. He had been through enough bullshit. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't competing with me, you know? And he loved me, and I'd worked through a lot of stuff. And one time he said I couldn't see him for a month. One day. Because I was taking too many liberties, and he was already starting to have to answer to our love. And he was doing it because he wanted to, and then suddenly he put the stops on it because of his own pain with honey in the past and all the rest of it. So he said I couldn't see him, and that night I saw him anyway. And he was so happy that I was there. He started to just cry. He said, called me his sassy lassie, you know, that I got all my courage up to, and I said, I'm, you know, and he wouldn't let me go after that, you know, and so when he died, I was so devastated, absolutely devastated. Nobody wanted me around. They didn't, because everyone was smoking grass, you know, and I was a potential trouble source, you know, because and I just didn't have it together at all. Cass took me in to her place. Because I had nowhere to live. I was still doing comedy gigs, like out in Corona. I would take these pills that Milty gave me, Dr. Birnbaum. They were pills that they kind of de-animated you so that you didn't feel anything. You know, you felt like furniture. I felt like a table, you know. And then I would drive out to Corona, get on stage, and do this really perfunctory set, and then cry all the way home. And you know, and I was staying at Cass's, and what a circus it was at the time. She was always having people there, like the Beatles and the Byrds, and all these people were around me, and I was gone. I was just gone, you know. Then she took me to New York to get me away from it all, and I stayed in New York, and Billy Saluga, Ray J. Jones, you can call me Ray and you can call me Jay, he just called on the phone, was kind enough to let me stay at his place. He was the most beautiful person to me. He just did not intrude in what I just had to go through. And I wrote a film with I helped to write a film with Fred Baker, who wrote the Lenny Bruce Without Tears book. Film. And then we wrote a screenplay together, having to do with, not to do with Lenny. And I started slowly doing comedy again. Then I moved out of Billy's, rented a little room at the Henry Hudson Hotel, the top. And I had this little push-button organ, and I would play my funeral music all the time and write my poetry. And then Billy and I came back to California a year later. Came out as man and wife because it was cheaper, and he went his way on to becoming a star, and I went mine. I had a little, I had gotten a little inheritance at that point. And for that year I lived on it. I had a little place up in Laurel Canyon where I learned to play the piano and wrote a few songs.
You didn't play before?
Oh, I played before, but I didn't have my own understanding. I didn't have my own true relationship with the piano. And I just used what I call the hit or miss system until I started to hit more than I missed, you know. And I heard a lot of music, and I had to learn how to duplicate it on the piano. And sometimes I'd have to bang around for hours. Joni Mitchell once told me she learned to play piano in defense because she couldn't stand. She lived on the hill above me. They all heard me banging away every day. And I was working at the Troubadour. I had just enough gigs to keep me out there. And then I remember auditioning for Laugh-In and thinking it was so frivolous. I still had a lot to learn, but you said, how did I find God? The point is that every day I wrote and wrote and wrote and expressed myself, and I kept on writing and expressing my pain, and finally expression started to win the race of pain, you know? And the music started to come beautifully, and Richie Havens recorded this song that I had written to Lenny, which the poem of it was, "Cautiously you handed me a rose, pretending to know all a lover knows. I wore that rose pretending that I knew the reasons for the changes as it grew. And cautiously you said to me, please be my bride, pretending to believe that you could abide. I wore that pretense, wanting so to share the changes in the rose, though dead I wear. And where do I go from here?" And as I said, Lenny died in the bloom of our love, you know, and hadn't really had a chance to even begin to spoil. And so I just kept on following that love to the point where it became perfect, and he wasn't there to interfere with it at all, you know. And I followed it to such perfection that it became God. And I received the Holy Spirit one day. Now, I mean, you know, when I say the Holy Spirit, the light changed. It's what I suppose they meant when they say your consciousness actually expands. Suddenly you have more peripheral vision. Everything changes, you know. And I was washed clean. My heart had been made clean after I had been crying daily and expressing daily and purging daily, and nobody was there to interfere with it, you know. And then I just began to channel like this poetry. It just kept on coming, and I seemed very weird to most people, I've got to tell you. I was, you know, people thought I had flipped out. They thought I'd gone over the line, you know, and
What did you feel?
well, I mean, the part of me that still had a sense of humor said, uh-oh, because I started to hear a voice, you know, I mean, directing me. And then Richie Havens came into my life and showed me, introduced me to the Bible again, and showed me passage after passage about what the born-again situation really was when you receive the perfect consciousness, or as the Christians call it, the Christ consciousness, where you receive the Holy Spirit, you know. And I mean, God knows, when I grew up, Jesus and bacon were synonymous, you know. And I didn't get into the part where he died for the sins and all that, guilt, and the rest of the original sin and all that, but I started to find myself in there. And I wasn't the only one. Suddenly you start to attract people of like principle, you know. And I had just enough substantiation at that point to follow a path. I would like to, here's a poem I used to give out when I was on stage. It cost me $40 a month just to keep giving this poem out, and then I would find it on the floor afterwards, and I said, I'm not making a cent, I'm giving out this poetry, and and it's well and good, but I'm finding shoe marks on it at the end of the performance. But then every so often I'd run into someone who said, God, did that poem ever help me? I have it on my wall. And I said, well, it's worth it, you know. And it's called Find Comfort, and I wrote this in that period. Just at that point, it was about 6 weeks after that experience that I'm talking about, you know. And where I couldn't do anything but call what it was God. I had just been brought to my knees and saved, you know. Where I was washed clean, where I felt good, where I felt love. I mean, just, I don't know if it's particularly Jewish, I just never felt that much, you know, I just never felt that true, honest-to-God exchange. It was all a game before that, you know. I just felt in touch with the whole world, and I started writing poetry like, if you could hear the voice of every man or everyone, you'd hear the silence of God. And when you've heard that voice of God, then you know where you've trod. And when you know where you've trod, then no matter what you do, you can find a place for everyone's voice in the space that God called you. It just got real simple, what it was about, you know. And I mean, I wasn't confused. I didn't think Lenny was God, you know. He just led me there. Because I finally loved being more than I loved myself, you know. I was able to get outside the small self and find the bigger self.